All right, and welcome to this month's English Language Testing Society webinar, sponsored. We want to thank our sponsor, ITEP, the International Test of English Language Proficiency. My name is Michael Fields, and I'll be leading you through this workshop on rubrics and essentially on norming and how we can best norm, or one way to norm. So let's go ahead and get started. And just a little background, which you can tell me if you know most of this already, but I think a first question we might want to ask is why use rubrics? Let's remember that they add validity to assessment because the descriptors provide the construct definition. So when we have a good rubric, we can be fairly sure that we're measuring the whole construct and not just part of a construct based on our personal bias. They add reliability to scoring, both intra-rater and inter-rater reliability, when we're using the same set of criteria time and time again. And no matter who uses the rubric, we'll be using the same criteria. Similarly, it helps teachers to see the whole picture. Very similar to that idea of using the descriptors to create the whole construct. For the students, it adds transparency because students can see exactly what they're being evaluated on, especially if we share the rubric with students beforehand. I think that even has greater advantages. It also allows teachers and students to have a clear basis for feedback. Excuse me, so everyone's sort of on the same page. And when we use the same rubric over time, we can see progress. We can see how students are progressing. Georgi is here. Let me just make a note. Georgi comes almost to every webinar, and she's in Scotland. All right, let's go ahead, if I remember correctly. Let's remember that when we score with rubrics, the descriptors themselves are not assessments. Their descriptors are just descriptors. They just describe. But the assessment really comes when we match the student performance on a speaking task or on a writing task with the descriptors. So really, it's matching the student performance with the descriptors. That's the assessment. And sometimes teachers say that they feel a bit excluded somehow because they're not giving grades. They feel that they're not in control. And in a sense, that's really true. Teachers are no longer giving grades. The rubric is revealing the grade. And so, but again, I think it's a more valid and reliable method for scoring performance-based evaluation, like speaking or writing, rather than just doing some kind of impression marking. Okay. And if we are using rubrics, I think it's also very important that we norm from time to time. So what that essentially means is that, excuse me, if a group of teachers are using the same rubric, that we all come together and we make sure that we're on the same page. Why is that? Well, here's a map of the Atlantic Ocean, and I want you to imagine setting off from Boston for Lisbon, but you were just 5 degrees off course. Just 5 degrees. Doesn't sound like much. Don't worry. By the time I get close to, I set off from Boston, by the time I get close to the European continent, I'll just sort of find my way to Lisbon. It won't be that hard. It's just 5 degrees. But we can see as we continue to sail farther and farther out to sea, that 5 degrees becomes wider and wider. And soon we're going to find ourselves in an entirely different place from where we intended to be. This is exactly what happens when we, as raters, using rubrics, fail to norm, is that those little differences as time goes on tend to make a big difference. And I want to just share quickly 4 scenarios for unnormed raters. So some will tend to skew high, and the longer we go without norming, the higher they tend to get. So those that skew high tend to continue on that trajectory and just go farther and farther off base, higher and higher. Some, on the other hand, tend to skew low, and they'll again go on that trajectory, just like sailing across the Atlantic, right? they'll continue on that trajectory until they're farther and farther off. And that's really the reason that we norm, is to bring these people back. And these are the easy ones when you think about it. These are the easy ones to correct, right? If someone's skewing high or skewing low, that norming is really going to bring them back to where they should be. And a couple problems that are a bit more difficult to solve when raters are not normed. Some of them tend to have what's called the central tendency error, where they sort of see everyone as in the middle, and no matter what the performance is, everyone gets kind of the middle score. That's a bit harder, but again, norming can help to overcome that. And finally, perhaps the hardest one is the kind of rater that just scores randomly, that isn't really that good with norming, or sorry, with rubric rating. And in that case, if we, so in that case, we just see them getting these kind of random scores all the time. We're never sure if he's going to rate really high or really low or something else, right? And in that case, if this person cannot be kind of brought into the fold, it might be better to not have them rating at all. That's sort of the one that we'd like to really eliminate if we can't kind of get them on track. Okay. So the goals of norming are to eliminate those errant tendencies that we just looked at by bringing raters into alignment with each other, so that a group of raters wouldn't, no matter who rated a speech sample or a writing sample, wouldn't be very different. So in a sense, it doesn't matter in the end who rates the papers. We're going to get the same score from any rater. And that's really important, because if different raters give very different scores, then we're not capturing the performance alone. We're combining the performance with the rater's bias. So, for example, if I have a bias, if I have a tendency towards grammatical correctness, and someone else, I'm thinking about writing in this case, say I have a bias towards correct grammar, and someone else has a bias towards good organization, and we see a paper that's very good in grammar but very poor in organization, we might give it vastly different scores, right? Because of our own personal bias. So again, when we norm, we bring raters into alignment with each other. But we also bring raters into alignment with a standard. So that standard, of course, is the descriptors in the rubric. And no matter where the raters are, pre-norming, we hope that by norming, they come back and fall in line with that standard. So those are really the goals of norming. Did everyone get the handouts that were included in the email today? Does everyone have those? Betty, you've got them?
No. Let's see if I can get to my email.
Okay. Georgi, you've got those. You've got those attachments.
Yeah. Hi. Yes, but I just finished work, so I downloaded them, but I couldn't.
Okay. All right.
Yes, I have them.
Great. Okay, we'll be using those in just a moment. So this is really a workshop. What I'm saying now is just sort of pre-workshop, but we're going to get to the nitty-gritty in just a minute. The norming process, or Tim said he does a norming process and he does it online, and it's sort of in the quiz format. And maybe at the end, if we have some time, I'd love to hear more about that. I'm going to give you the sort of the standard. This is the one proposed by Cambridge Assessment. This is the one proposed by Alta. This is the one proposed by whoever wrote the CEFR. This is the sort of standard. So the process has 4 steps. One is familiarizing, or we hope refamiliarizing, the raters with the rubric. So even though you may have been using the rubric, the more familiar you get with it, in many cases, people tend to go back and read it less and just rely on their knowledge of the rubric. So that's an issue. So we want to refamiliarize our raters with the actual descriptors in the rubric. Then together as a group, we want to review samples and come to a decision on how we would score a sample as a group. And we, of course, discuss. Then we want to practice rating in small groups where everyone has to agree on the score. And then we want to sort of test our trainees or our normies, I guess, by having them rate a small sample of essays or speech samples alone. And then we're coming back and reporting those and seeing to what degree they've matched. And of course, we're never going to get complete, same outcomes, but we should be close. Usually one band out is okay. More than that, and that's a problem. Okay. So this is a copy of our rubric. It's not quite complete, but let's just go over it. And you have this as an attachment in your email. So we're going to work, and actually, if I can just, let's see if I can bring up. Let's see if I can bring up, because the one I sent to you is just a little bit more detailed. They're the same descriptors. Sorry, I'm just bringing this up. Okay. The only thing added here, so let's have a look at this. We have 4 categories. Great. We have content, and this is for writing, of course. We have content and development. We have organization and cohesion. We have structure, which essentially refers to grammar, etc. And we have vocabulary, and which should have a capital V, shouldn't it? Okay. And we have 5 points, 5 levels. We have sort of the A level, which will score 95, the B level, which will score 85. We have a 75. And if we scroll down, we see a 65 and a 55. So we have 4 possible grades we can give, but actually we can go a little farther than that. Let's look on the left-hand side. We have these very nice, quick descriptors that might allow you to think holistically about what you're reading, and maybe allow you to find the right range. So we go all the way from, well, we'll start at the top. We go from the outstanding essay, and if we award a 5+, it's the exceptional essay. So your 5 is outstanding, and your 5+ is, should rarely be given. That is an exceptional essay. And that would translate, instead of a 95, that would translate into 100. So if you really feel like you would give 100 of this paper, you can award 5+. We have the strong essay and the very strong essay. And again, you would award 85 for each of these categories, right? Each of these categories is separate. You would award 85, or if you really felt it's better than a 4, so the descriptor for this category is better than a 4, but not quite a 5, you can give a 4+. And that translates into a 90, et cetera, et cetera. The level appropriate, or the standard essay, is a 3. Strong standard essay is a 3+. The threshold essay is a 2. It's just barely, barely passing. And the 2+, the marginally passing essay, and 1 is the failing essay. Okay. And we have some descriptors, of course, for every category. And you see these bold. These bolds are sort of must statements. So we cannot award, say, a 4. Let's just look at that descriptor, for example. Complex sentences predominate. We cannot award a 4 if we don't see that. If we don't see that, we can only go as high as a 3+. Or paragraphing is handled adequately. If we don't see that, we can only go as high as a 2+. Okay, so these are kind of thresholds or floors, if you will, right? You're not allowed to give that if you don't see that. You can give the next one down. So finally, what we would do is if we read, you know, a sample essay, and we might give a 3, and a 4, and a 3, and a 4. And then so we get a 75, 85, 75, 85. This is an analytic rubric. And of course, that's I'm doing this, you know, in a very easy way. That's going to work out to a score of 80. Okay. So again, we are not making any judgment. The rubric, we're matching the descriptors to the performance that we have in front of us, and the rubric reveals the score. So that's essentially the way that we work. And now what we want to do is we want to, do you need a few minutes to look over these descriptors? Would you feel better if you had a few minutes to read this? Or are we ready to move on?
Can move on.
Okay, let's go ahead then. I didn't hear any strong. Okay, I'm going to pull up out of the documents that I sent you. I'm going to pull up essay number 1. I probably need to do a new share. Okay, let's take a minute, everyone, to read this. Oh, by the way, sorry, I'll interrupt you. Just for the sake of time, I'm using 1 paragraph. Normally, this rubric would be for entire essays, but I took 1 paragraph summaries just for our webinar to save time. So just think about this in terms of we're only reading a paragraph. Betty, we'll begin with you. Just generally, before we start looking at the rubric, just generally, what would you say about this?
Good points. I do see an indication of the topic with supporting detail,
Okay.
and a conclusion. So in structure, there is a organization overall that you can follow. I do see some higher level vocabulary. I don't know how much is from the article, but a higher level of vocabulary. I do see some syntactical issues, some morphology errors, and some to the point where it's a little confusing for the reader. I mean, that's just those are my quick impressions there.
That's great. No, that's great. Tim, do you want to, before we look at the rubric, do you want to make any comments similar or different from Betty's?
Well, just a general comment. When I'm looking at this, I'm wondering, is this sort of am I looking at an achievement test or an aptitude test? And so a lot of my grades, and that also has to do with what is the group level and the assignment level. So if this is our highest level writing class, I would grade it differently than our second level writing class. And also our placement test, we also do like a writing score, which we look at somewhat differently.
Absolutely. Tim, those are good points. And sorry, I'm just pulling all this out of context for the purposes of today. This would be an achievement. This would be no sort of final, but it would be a kind of single example of achievement along the way in the context of an upper intermediate class that's oriented towards academic skills. So this would be some kind of formative assessment, and they would probably get a chance to rewrite this. So given that, any comments?
So this is also just a first draft as well.
Well, actually, no, these are not first drafts. But yeah, these are second drafts. And if there was another draft after this, depends on the time and the importance of this. This is only a very short summary, so these aren't considered that important in the context of the class I took it from. But for longer assignments, we would see more, multiple drafts.
Yeah, so looking at the rubric, I do see most of this falls on, I think, the highest level. I don't need to go into too many details, but that's my impression at first.
Okay. Georgi, any comments?
Yes, so just for both of you, Betty and Tim, because they touched on like different aspects. So I would say, yeah, with the syntactic and things that the aim is high, but those discourse markers and the relations, like the coherence relations, the aim is there, and you can follow, but that's what's missing for me. That's what makes it a bit harder, if you know what I mean.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to point. Sorry, Georgi, go ahead.
Yeah, and then just for what Tim was saying, so it really matters because what level? So where is this writer? Because you can clearly say that he's trying to follow all those principles and things. It's just the tools are kind of, I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And I apologize. I don't know another way to do this because we're out of context here. For the purposes of this webinar, we're by force, we're out of context. But I just want to point out, I want to go back to something that Betty talked about, the vocabulary and how a lot of this vocabulary was pulled from the reading. This is a summary, but that doesn't mean that this writer copied from the text. I think they used, this is original language. Obviously, this is not copied because we can see by all the errors, right? But I think they're using a lot of high-level vocabulary, and they're using it often correctly. Except I wanted to point out life expectancy became expectancy I think in a few more places. That might have been used again. So they didn't really get that collocation. Although they did it once correctly, they didn't really do it correctly again, that collocation. But lots of good vocabulary. I just want to. I'm not sure if that's a great collocation, but I understand what it means. Really lots. I think for me, that's the strength of this essay is, oh, here is expectancy again, right? Not used correctly, really. For me, one of the strengths of this essay was the vocabulary, often almost always used correctly, and that's because they had a reference. But anyway, let's see.
Can I say one more thing?
Oh, please.
And as far as the task here, and so we're not really just looking at their aptitude or their ability to produce English. This is a specific task where they're summarizing. So they're also using paraphrasing skills and things like that, and being able to get the main points from the reading. So it really kind of goes beyond just simple aptitude with the language, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, you could certainly make that argument, yes. Although for my own purposes, what I want to do here is focus on the linguistic features of this. So, oh, what happened? That's not what we want to see, is it? Sorry, just a moment. see if I can. Okay, let's, I'm not sharing, am I? Sorry. Will it let me do that? Yeah, sure it will. Okay, I think everyone's seeing two documents now. Is that what you're seeing?
No, we're just seeing
No,
the
just
rubric.
the rubric.
You're just seeing the rubric. Okay, I don't think I'm able. I've split this. I've done a split screen, but I don't think you're able to see that. All right. Well, maybe we can go back and forth, but I'd like us to talk together now about where you would put this essay. Let's look at content and development first. And you know, I can stop this because it's not working, right? You're only seeing the rubric. Let's just look at that then. Okay, so now I'm seeing the same thing you are. All right. I actually had two screens up, but I don't think that works on Zoom. All right. So let's try to give this essay a score. And again, Tim makes very good points, but I want to try to limit, for our purposes today, I want to try to limit our evaluation to the linguistic features of that text. And so I know it's a little tough, but with trying to go back and forth, but Georgi, we'll begin with you. What score would you give it for content and development?
Well, it's answered the task with yes. And he has those points quite really communicated. And I would say it's 85 for me.
Okay, so you would go.
I would go the 4, but not 4+, maybe 4.
Okay, let's give it a. Okay. Betty, how about you? Feel free to disagree or agree.
Just looking at content and development, I can't speak to accurate because it's a response to this article, but we're just looking at the essay itself. I'm more toward a 3 than a 4, and the reason for that is because of clarity. But in terms of the thesis statement, conclusion, supporting detail, the structure is there. The in terms of logic and progression, yes. The content and development clarity is influenced by the grammar.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see a separate. You've got
grammar is the structure category. The structure category.
Okay. And that, okay, yeah, now I see, because I thought you were just focusing on compound complex. In that case, I would go with a 4.
Also, yeah, please go ahead.
Because we have a separate evaluation for grammar.
Yeah, and Betty, I'm just going to use different symbols for the three of you, and I'll try to keep them straight. Betty, I think that's a really good point, and we might as well bring that up. Is that we might find the essay somehow deficient in one of these categories, but we don't want to penalize it twice. So what Betty's saying is, is the essay clear and intelligible in all main points and details? Betty, would you agree with that?
In terms of the progression of ideas and the essay structure and the use of support, yes. In terms of clarity of some of the ideas that are being made, some of the supporting detail, there's a lack of clarity, but it is primarily due to the grammatical issues.
Okay, so you would give it a, okay, so I think that's really the point, is that we don't want to look at those grammatical issues and then detract from this first category. Tim, how about you?
We're just looking at the content and development.
Yeah, for now.
I would say a 4. I think that's the weakest part of this whole thing, now that I know that it's a summary.
Okay. Okay, great. So everyone's already normed. Everyone agrees on a 4 here. Let's go on to the other categories. Tim, we'll begin with you this time on the sorry, it's called organization and cohesion.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty strong in that. It starts with the kind of the formulaic phrase that's appropriate for this. It ends with a, I mean, it's a fragment, but, or I mean, it's not a full thought really, but it has sort of a summary statement at the end. I'm assuming that it's organized in the same order as the article that they're summarizing, which would be the standard way to do it. As far as flow and cohesion, it does use, let's see, is this where we put run-on sentences, things like that?
You might, or that might, depending on how you see it, that might be grammar, right?
Yeah, there's some parallelism and some run-on sentence problems.
And I think you're bringing up a good point, is that these, we can never surgically extract these descriptors and where they won't overlap at all. There's always some degree of overlap. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I'm struggling too, because I know a tendency of English teachers like myself is to look for the mistakes instead of what they do right.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm looking at what they do right, I might give it a different score than if I'm looking at their mistakes.
Okay. So what, if you had to give it a score, what would it be?
I think since this is an upper intermediate class, I think I would give this a 5 for the organization.
All right. Georgi, how about you?
Yeah, sorry, but I do need to disagree here. And I would say actually that this category or criterion is the weakest. It doesn't mean it's weak, but if I compare to the others, I would say that's a 3+, because to me the 4 is what I did here for the rubric. For the 4, it's not that, but it's nearly there.
Okay, Georgi, we're having a little trouble hearing you, but you said 4, is that right?
No, I said I would like to give it a 4, but it's just below. So I'm gonna say 3+.
3+. All right, I'm going to put you in the top part of this box. 3+. Great. Betty, how about you?
In terms of, yeah, I'm going to be in the middle here. I can't say 5 in that it's outstanding in organization and cohesion. What I was doing was looking at the descriptor that's below where I tended to think. My first reaction was, okay, it's between a 3 and 4. So I'm looking at both descriptors, the level 3 and the level 4. There is organization, there is development. I can't say the paragraphs are well developed. The topic is clear. The supporting sentences are relevant, logical. I didn't see anything irrelevant. The weakness is a little bit of cohesion. But then I'm looking at level 3. Minimum for level 3 is that paragraphing is handled adequately. You do have paragraph form. It is about one topic. The overall purpose is clear. I cannot say that the cohesive devices are often used incorrectly and thus distort the message. That's what makes me move it up to a 4. But if I were in a norming session and everybody else was saying 3+, I would not have a problem with saying 3+. But I cannot say that there's extensive or frequent incorrect use of cohesive devices.
Okay, we'll give it a 4. That's fine. And it looks like we're everyone's agreed on the first category. We got a wider range on the second, which is interesting to know. How about the third one? And Georgi, we'll begin with you this time. The grammar, the structure.
Okay. Couldn't we include you, Michael?
I'm sorry?
Couldn't we include your score?
I'm not going to score this one. It's only for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say that's a strong 4, but not 4+.
A strong 4.
It's a strong 4, but not 4+.
Okay, great. So that's interesting. I just want to call attention to complex sentences predominate. We can go back and look at that. And it's generally comprehensible despite some inaccuracies, generally comprehensible. Okay, great. Tim, what about you?
Well, given that we've put in bold here, complex sentences predominate, that seems to be the chief. So sentence structure seems to be the main thing we're looking at. I would give it a 4+. Again,
Okay.
knowing that this is supposed to be an upper intermediate class.
Okay, so even a bit higher. Betty, how about you?
We need a norming session. In terms of grammar,
Yeah.
I recognize the complex sentence structures, but there are errors, and this is a place where you can evaluate the grammatical accuracy. And there are errors that do distort the message, even though you get a general idea. I would have to say 3+ on this one, just because there are grammatical errors that distort the reader's understanding of the intended meaning.
Yeah, and really, I'll just call your attention to this. And I'm not saying anyone here is right or wrong, but just that I think one of the differences here. Well, first, I mean, in 4, the complex sentences predominate. In 3, it's just that they're used, right? But then you've got this idea that although there are errors, it's all basically comprehensible, versus although there are errors, we see those errors sometimes distorting the message. Although the general, or the meaning's generally clear, the main ideas are still there. So depending on how you fall in that, you might go between where Tim is. Sorry, who's the star? That's Georgi, right? Tim's the star, right?
I think I was 4+. I think that was the highest.
Yeah. Tim, between where Tim is and where Betty is, it maybe a factor of how you read these descriptors, and that's okay. Let's go ahead to vocabulary, and Betty, we'll begin with you.
Oh, okay. Sorry, let me switch here. Vocabulary. Let's see. I'd say a 4+ on this one, because there is some impressive use of vocabulary, although not always correct, but
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay, Tim?
Yeah, I'm about at a 4, maybe a 4+, I don't know.
Okay. Georgi,
Plus for me.
sorry?
4+ for me.
Okay, great. So it looks like we're very, I think it worked out really well on the vocabulary. Everyone's right in the same place and the same on the content. Okay. One thing that I'll just point out, and in my reading, and you really don't have to agree with me, but in my reading of this is some topic appropriate vocabulary is used. Absolutely. Collocations we see. But then if we go to 5, vocabulary adds to the general intelligibility and fluency. And I wouldn't really give it that, because all that vocabulary it's sort of, you can see that it's kind of pulled out from the reading and dropped in, and which is good if they're using it right. I'm not criticizing that, but you don't really get that feeling that they're able to write that way intelligibly and fluently, right? It's more like they've extracted that from the reading and dropped it in. And that's why I think this 4+ is probably right on. Okay. So we see that everyone's agreed on the content and development and the vocabulary, and maybe there's a little more variety on the organization and grammar. So just to know, and think about where you are you sort of on the high end, or are you kind of on the low end? Just think about that. And now what we're going to do is, we didn't calculate the score, and now I've erased it. Okay, but we generally saw they're sort of in that B range, right? Now what I'd like you to do is, I'm going to pull up the second essay, and I would like you to do the same thing. I will put you in a breakout room together, and I'll give you 5 minutes. I'd like you to evaluate this. And here's the thing, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. You must come to agreement. When you come back in 5 minutes, someone's going to report the scores. So, don't fight too much, but try to come, and if you can't, that's fine. Try to come to agreement on all the scores, okay? I'm going to put you in a breakout room, and I'll share this to the breakout room. And that's so that I'll put you in a breakout room so that, my presence doesn't influence you whatsoever. And we don't want 120 minutes, do we? That would be too long. Okay, I'll go ahead and open that. Have a good time, and I'll see you in. Yeah. Tim?
I have to leave in 15 minutes, I'm sorry, so just.
That's okay, this is only 5 minutes, so we're over in 15 minutes anyway. So go ahead, 5 minutes. Please try to come to agreement. All right. Let's just review again why we what's so great about rubrics. Some common arguments that people make against rubrics. I already know how to grade my students. I know what I'm looking for without a rubric. But using a rubric makes grading more transparent, and it makes giving feedback easier. Even if you know what you're looking for, your students might not. So using a rubric helps in that way. Some people might say, well, it's too hard to read and figure out all the categories. It takes too much time. But I hope that what we've seen today is that as you familiarize yourself with the descriptors, it becomes easier and it becomes faster. The descriptors don't match what my students actually produce. That's very common, is that we have these sort of general descriptors, but then when we get the real performance, there are always things that don't fall neatly into any of those categories or don't really describe what the students produced. I think the solution to that is to use a best fit approach. So we don't have to match every descriptor exactly, but we have to find out which one is the best fit, not too high, not too low, right? And if it's always a problem, you might want to consider changing the descriptors based on what students are actually producing. The scores that I get with the rubric don't seem right to me. I hear this all the time from teachers who feel that the scores are too high. And I think for me, what that means is that teachers are approaching this from a kind of deficit model where they're looking for what's wrong in the writing or the speaking, but they're not giving credit to what's right, what the student has done. So again, seeing all the descriptors and giving credit where credit's due, and maybe withholding credit for those parts of the performance that are weaker, is a fairer way to grade than to base your grade on what the student hasn't done right, which I see sometimes teachers doing. Okay. And finally, some people might say, I was doing fine before, why should I change? So again, rubrics are more valuable and reliable than impression marking. Okay. I want to thank ITEP once again for sponsoring this this webinar. So thank you very much to the International Test of English Proficiency. Thank you for participating. I hope you've learned something. Next month, we're going to talk about discrete point, integrative, and communicative test design. Any last comments before we wrap up? We've got a couple minutes. Any last comments, questions?
Just to mention, like when we do our norming, we found a lot of times it's better to do it anonymously, because it tends to, when you do it together, you tend to reinforce that central tendency error, because people don't want to be way off. So they're just like, I'm just going to choose something kind of in the middle. So, so it takes away that pressure. We've also gone to, at least for our aptitude tests, not our achievement tests so much, but we use rubrics for everything, of course. But I tend to use one rubric for grading and one rubric for feedback, because our students get so confused about what the rubric means that I give them a simplified version of it, basically.
Right.
And the other thing that we've moved to is a more holistic grading system, and we rely on a rubric, which is kind of more simple, but we also have a number of benchmark essays for each level. So people think in different ways, teachers think in different ways. So we find that referring to those benchmarks is also often very helpful for a certain kind of grader.
Right. Thank you. And Tim, if you have, I know you have to go, if you have just a minute, we have about a minute left. Do you want to just briefly tell us about how you do your online norming? I'd be really interested in.
Just basically, they have access to the rubric, and but they can't look at the benchmarks when they do that. Instead, we have a number of essays that are in an item bank, and they pop up randomly, and they're supposed to give them and it's a holistic grading, so they're just giving them a number between 1 and 7, and then they get a result. how far off they were from, what is considered the right score.
Mhm.
That, and so they do that individually.
Mhm.
And then there's like it's in our LMS, and so there's a place where they can give feedback on what they thought as well.
What happens if their scores are not where they should be?
We haven't, this is sort of a new system, so we don't, and we're such a small program that we don't really have a system for that, but we would talk, just say you're grading a little high or you're grading a little low, sort of thing, and giving them feedback that way. And if they're consistently off, like you said, just a random person, then maybe they won't be asked to do the grading of those essays so much.
Right, right. All right. Well, thank you. I think we're about out of time. Thank you, everyone, for coming and participating. And I hope to see you next month. So for the English Language Teaching Society, I'm going to say goodbye to everyone.
Thank you for this.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're quite welcome.
Oh, bye now.